Thank you so much for joining us. So this is a Q&A, and we will put it out to the audience in a little bit. So if you have any questions, hold on to them for just a couple minutes, or if you're not sure if you do, maybe just see if you can formulate something. I will just preface it with, I think if you've been to a film screening with a Q&A before, you may have seen those people who say like, well, I don't quite really have a question, I have more of a statement. Let's save those. Let's save those statements, because it's a Q&A, not like a statements and answers. So, you need the questions to get the answers part, like they go together. Not that we don't love your statements. But again, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I think one of the things that I think a lot of people who create films, watch films, especially in the indie world, may be interested in or get curious about. I was certainly curious about it. Is how do you get involved with the film? And I know you have an interesting, I think, story about getting involved with this particular film. Can you tell us a little bit? How did you get in Mutt? How did you get to play Feña?
Yeah, so I'm just an actor in the film, and so traditionally, as an actor, you maybe have agents or a manager who send you a breakdown about an upcoming project that they think you're right for, and you put yourself on tape or you go into a room for an audition, and that's sort of how the process commences. But as a trans actor, the opportunities to play lead parts, whether it's in television or film or in theater, are at this point in time few and far between. And so what the queer community has done is sort of taken back that process and made it a lot more grassroots. And so I actually found out about this film from a few friends DMing me on Instagram, being like, hey man, I saw this breakdown for a character, like, is this you, ? Like, no worries. Because there's a sort of uncanny amount of similarities between my identity makeup and the character Feña. So I received a few DMs and I was like, what is this project? And then at the same time, I saw an email on a listserv that I'm a part of for trans actors that was a breakdown of the character. And Feña on the page was described as, like, he was like half Chilean, half Serbian. As we shared, I'm half Puerto Rican, half Greek. That's like kind of similar. And then it was like shooting fully in Ridgewood and Bushwick, which are the neighborhoods that I lived in for 6 years in New York. And it was like must have had top surgery, which as a trans person, not everyone has access to that kind of care. And at the point that I was reading this breakdown 6 months before, I had given myself permission to transition in that way. And so had I read this a few months before, I wouldn't have been eligible to play this part. And then the last thing was like, Feña is sharp but tender. I was like, I'm sharp but tender. Like, what the hell? And I was I was kind of overwhelmed reading this description because, again, I had never heard of a lead character in a film that I could play myself in to a certain extent. And obviously I'm different than the character in many ways, but so many of the parts I see, I have to convince the casting director or convince the director, hey, you wrote this for a guy or you wrote this for a girl, but would you consider someone different? And here's my take on the part. And so the fact that I didn't have to do that was so exciting. And I emailed Vuk, the writer-director, and I was like, you don't know me, but I am this part. I'll do anything. Please just give it to me. And he was like, chill out. Like, here's the script. Like, send me an audition. And I was like, for sure. And then I auditioned and I got it. And I didn't actually know this at the time, but he had been trying to cast this part for 2 years before he found me or I found him. Because again, there's just like not many trans masculine actors who are working professionally. And then, he wanted to honor the mixed ethnicity aspect of the character and have it be someone who is, first or second generation Latin, Hispanic, and be able to sort of walk that line of like, okay, I do have this Chilean father, but I don't quite fit in Chile. Like I'm an American, and he didn't want to whitewash it. And so it took him a long time to find someone who would be able to honor the fullness of what he wrote. And I guess he saw like 150 plus audition tapes from people across the country, which is amazing that he put in that work to try to find someone, even people who didn't identify as actors. They were like, I just connect with this, like, please let me submit. So yeah, that's the story of that.
It's fantastic. It's a very the right person, the right role coming together, happening to find each other at just the right time. It sounds like with
exactly,
as you were saying. And I think it seems like it's so important in this because the nuances of identity. Like I think as you were saying, like a lot of the roles for trans actors are kind of very fixated on one portion of that identity, and it's a very and how do you kind of approach it, or how was it easy to kind of slide into this role, or did you have to kind of adapt?
Well, it's interesting because the Feña, the character written on the page in the script, was a lot more of an anti-hero than what we see in this final product of the film. He was a lot more abrasive. You didn't really like him for the majority of the film. Like, it took you a long time to get to a place, maybe like halfway through the second section with the sister. That's on the page when you started to be like, okay, he really wants to be a big brother to his little sister, and I can connect with him. But me, Leo, as a person, I'm pretty soft and sensitive and like sweet, like in my personality. And so when I was reading it and then sort of starting to workshop it with Vuk, I pitched to him, I was like, hey, look, I'm a trained actor. I can do this thing if you want. I can be like a little bit more prickly. I can sort of be caustic and kind of like defensive at the world, or I can bring more of myself to it. And I think we might end up with a film that's more raw and like more accessible in this weird way. And that conversation wasn't as overt as the language that I just used, because obviously Vuk, I don't want to like step on his toes in terms of his vision. But just basically asking him, can I bring myself to this? I think if I bring as much of myself as possible, it will actually serve the film than me sort of doing a little bit more of a transformation. And he was really open to it and really down. And I think what ended up happening was that Feña is a lot more likable. Like, there are moments where he's defensive and a little bit, he's like screaming and pissed or whatever. But, you know, what's been so cool is people walk away from this movie who've never met a trans person before. And they're like, they've said to me and to Vuk, I feel like I have a trans friend. Like, I know this person and I like them and I get them. And that is so meaningful and so radical, especially at the stage we're at in terms of representation for trans people on screen. So that was really cool. So in a sense, it was like the call to action for me was to come to set and be as present as I could possibly be. And sort of like repeat as a mantra, like reveal yourself, like over and over, rather than trying to go some distance in terms of like a portrayal of a character. And then also the benefit and the almost like cheat code of this was that the film takes place over 24 hours. So I actually didn't have to do any additional work besides be present, because I wasn't like, okay, this is 1942. What were the people like during that time? You know, like there wasn't an additional layer of research or a ton of time in between scenes that I have to like chart out what happened in that person's life. It was literally just like show up and be alive. And, you know, with such a small budget movie, in between each scene or shot, I'm lifting sandbags and putting them in the truck. I'm like, everyone is helping out. This was not like a studio movie. This was me helping the gaffer like lift the piece of equipment and then go into the scene. And so it was like, because that was the environment, it sort of, I think, allowed all of us to be like really in our bodies and really like committed to just getting the thing and then moving on. And that lack of preciousness, I think, also helped to allow this to be just, you know, kind of real, just like what it is, not too complicated, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, well, and it being a small indie, everybody's kind of hands-on. Were there any particularly memorable aspects of that, whether it's funny or maybe just kind of extra stressful? In that, was there anything in particular that happened during production like that?
Wow. Well, we shot this time last year. We had just wrapped. We shot over 24 days and we had 37 locations. And so just to like contextualize that, that means we were not in a single place more than a day. So the crew could never leave their equipment like in a location. We always had to pack it up. It was so deeply chaotic. I'm like, I think honestly, maybe, I'm like trying to remember something weird that happened. But the thing that comes to mind is there's a scene in the film where me and my sister are on the roof of the car eating pizza, and I'm giving her this like serious monologue about our abusive mother. And while we were shooting that scene, there was a subway train going by every 3 minutes, like above ground. And like the I'm like the BQ like train line never comes when you're waiting for like those trains, and then somehow during the shoot like every 3 minutes there was another subway. And then at the same time there was a guy outside watering his garden and humming. And so it was like I'm trying to do this like really emotional monologue like in close up, and every other minute they'd be like, hold for sound, and I'd be like, okay. And then you pick it back up like right where you stop. Like it's not like you can go back to the beginning. And so it was like this absurd, it was so deeply absurd, like to have to do this monologue with all of this shit and like them telling me to hold for sound like every minute. And then at a certain point I was like, sir, please, like we are trying to shoot a movie, like I love your humming, but like not now. Like, and it was so chaotic. And it was a part of the reason for that was because such a small movie, the director and cinematographer were like our location scout managers. And so what that means is like they're the ones going around finding the place we want to shoot at. And the director and DP, the cinematographer, only care about if it looks pretty. They're not thinking about the sound. And so almost every outdoor shot that we had was directly next to an above ground subway. Like, I'm not even kidding. Every single one. And so it was just like we would get there and start to shoot, and like the director would be like, oh shit, like we didn't realize that. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. And so anyway, I did like 127 lines of ADR, which for people who don't know, ADR is when you re-record dialogue in post-production, trying to match what your lips are doing on screen. And I'm like doing this for like 127 lines, which is a lot for an indie film. It was like 4 days. It was hellish, but also I would do anything for the film, so whatever.
Yeah. But it's relatable for anybody who's shot in the streets of New York, especially anywhere near subway.
Like bring a sound recorder, like bring someone who cares about sound when you do your location scout, because you really need to think about that.
It's very important.
Yes.
It is, as they say, half the picture.
Yeah.
So I will throw it out to the audience. If anybody has questions, I can kind of see anybody. Hands?
You guys are so cute in here.
Oh, I see one hand there.
Yeah, I'm super curious.
Oh, hey, Dom.
Hey, Leo. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm super curious about, for you, when I'm thinking about filmmaking, I'm always thinking about genre. And when you imagine your trajectory as a performer, what are the things that are like at the very edge of your imagination that you really want to have the chance to do?
Wow, awesome question. That's like an indulgent question for me. The realty is that I think by the time they want to remake the Joker movie in like 10 years, I will have aged into the part. And I think that having a trans masked Joker as like a exploration on toxic masculinity and sort of like the metastasization of like performing vitality as a man, and that sort of like then being like the ultimate villain is so sexy and interesting to me. And I think Joaquin Phoenix did an amazing job, but I feel like there's more to be done. So that's like my secret desire. Sort of genre-wise too. Yeah. I've thought a lot about that, obviously. It's like not, yeah.
I think we have a question over here.
Yeah, hey, congratulations.
Thank you.
Amazing work. Just curious, because you mentioned that there was a lot of you and your mantra was to be present as much as possible during the during the process. I'm curious if you can share if there were any limits that you gave yourself as in, okay, this is as much as I want to share as a, as a person. And if there was any of that during that process and how you handled it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Something that comes to mind is that I think you have to be a little bit of an exhibitionist of some kind to be an actor. And so I derive a lot of pleasure out of revealing things that perhaps other people want to keep private. Because I'm interested in what happens when we sort of lay bare the ugliness or the tenderness of our humanity. I actually don't even think Mutt is a film that required me to go all the way there. Like, I'm also a writer-director, and I am inspired by exploitation film, and I'm really sort of inspired by body horror, not just for shock factor, but for the way that it sort of invites the audience to deal with the flesh, And so I hope as a maker and then sometimes acting in my own work to even go further than anything we saw in this film. This is like, I feel like this is a great film to watch when you're like sad and it's raining outside and you want to eat ice cream and like have a comfort feeling. Vuk and I talk a lot about that, how sort of magical it is to make such a comforting movie. But yeah, I think in the context of Mutt, for your question, it was a little bit vulnerable to be in dynamic with Cole, who plays my ex-boyfriend in the film, because there was like this old, and this is maybe perhaps me revealing more to you than what was even on screen, but there was like this old belief system that came up that I was really surprised by, which is that I am somehow not desirable to men. Like when I was identifying as a woman in the world, I had a lot of sort of like weird feelings about my relationship to men as like a sexual person and as someone who is desirable, because I wasn't authentically in my body, I wasn't living authentically. And so I was performing this idea of femininity and sort of doing so in order to be desirable in the eyes of men, cis men. And so there was like this whole long dynamic in my life that was like about desirability in that space. And then as I started to transition and live more authentically, there was like this sort of fulcrum moment where I was like, wow, I'm now crossing over into a territory where I will no longer be desirable by men or desired by men. And am I okay with losing that social capital? Am I okay with losing that influence and power? Because even though I was performing as a woman, I was doing so successfully. And so I was able to maneuver the world in a way that I had a lot of privilege as like a white cis woman. But then as I sort of sacrificed that to be more authentic, I was losing out on this like access to power in a way, which I don't regret, but was like a moment that I had to consider. And so then now, in my current embodiment, I've just sort of gotten into this place where I'm like, wow, I'm desirable like in my authenticity, like how amazing is that? And then I'm like confronted by Cole, who is, he's gay, like he's a gay guy, but he's playing straight in this movie. And so I had this like moment where I was like, oh my God, like I'm not desirable to him as a woman or a man. Like I'm just nothing. Like it was like a micro moment of just feeling like sort of insecure and back in this place that was old and not me anymore. And sort of then having to move through that on set, like totally privately. I wasn't telling this to Vuk or Cole or anyone, and they were all so generous with me. It wasn't anything they were doing. But I had to sort of go through this journey and then be like, oh, Leo, what if this thing you believe intellectually, which is anyone can be attracted to anyone, which is what I do believe, that everyone sort of has this vitality and that's what people are attracted to. Like, what if I embody that and seduce him? Like, actually seduce him the way I would seduce someone I was interested in. And that's sort of like stepping into a territory of like revealing my sexuality and like being in it in front of someone who might not desire me, like actually was sort of a breaking point for me. Because suddenly I was like, wow, like I can just harness this anytime I want and it actually doesn't matter what he feels because like this vitality is not, you can't argue with it. It just is and it's real. And then you can see it on screen. It's like so hot. Like I'm like, that's a hot scene in the laundromat, you know? And then seeing that I was like, oh hell yeah, like I'm sexy, he's sexy, this is great, you know? Like that was very empowering. So that was like an edge.
Really profound. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other questions out there? Not seeing any. So, I wasn't necessarily gonna go with this one, but you did broach the topic of body horror, and I did see a list of some films that you found inspirational. I saw a personal favorite of mine, Titane, on there.
Oh yes.
Love that movie. Don't recommend that movie for everybody.
It's amazing.
It's an amazing film.
Yes.
But if you
top 3 for me.
but it is an interesting film in terms of its relationship to gender, because it's not about transness, but it has this sort of, it has this almost quality of kind of reversing that narrative to a point where she's, context for the audience, the film is about, let's just say she's a serial killer for simplicity's sake, who goes into hiding as the long-lost son of a fire chief in France. This is all in France. So just context for that. Oh, and she's pregnant.
By a car.
By a car.
She fucks a car and gets pregnant.
Yes, which is one of the reasons, not necessarily for everybody, definitely for me, but it's an interesting movie. But there is this sort of inversion of, it's not quite transness, but like because she's hiding and she's hiding, like, there's binding involved and all of that, is, I guess, what aspects of, because you did say it's inspirational, like what aspects of it are inspirational? Is it to your own art? Is it like?
Yeah, yes. I'm writing an essay, I'm trying to write this essay about like trans cinema and what that is, because Vuk, as the writer-director of this movie, has been asked that quite a bit. And I've talked to him about this. I actually don't think that this is an example of trans, what I'm thinking of as trans cinema, which is like the trans gaze from a cinematic perspective. Like the movie is trans. This movie is a traditional coming of age film type genre, indie drama, like, you know, that kind of character thing that centers a trans person, but the perspective of the camera and the director is not like making queer the form of the movie. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's like my take, and we can, you know, I'm down to talk at length with whoever wants to talk about that at another time. But what is so exciting to me about Titane is that it feels like an example of trans cinema in that it forces the audience to confront our relationship to the flesh, like the human body flesh, and how perverse and tender and weird and sensitive it is, just like literally the ephemerality, all of it with the flesh. And then the other piece of it is that it highlights the fact that gender is a story we tell each other. Because in the context of the film, this fire chief has lost his son. He thinks he's missing, he'll never see him again. The serial killer has to go into hiding. She incidentally looks like him. And so she shaves her head, breaks her nose, makes herself look like she would be an older version of his son. And then he's like, oh my God, Adrian, I've missed you. And she's like, yes, I'm your son. And they you know, sort of go into this crazy story together. That's not really giving away the movie. So what we realize is that even though he finds out who she is, now I really am spoiling it. Shit, I'm sorry guys, whatever. He's like, it doesn't matter who you are. Like, he needs a son so badly that if she's willing to play that part for him, he's willing to accept her as that. And she needs a place to be safe so badly that she will perform whatever person he needs her to be so that she can be safe. And so there's like this contract between them that allows them to perform the role of father and son, regardless of the fact that he is no longer a father because he doesn't have a son, and she was never his son in the first place. And so to me, what that points to is a sort of like larger philosophical framework for what queerness and what gender actually are, which is just an agreement between two people about how we're going to relate to each other, how we're going to be in service to one another, how we are going to like believe each other into existence. Because like when a person finds out, oh, I'm having a girl, and they're brought into the world, there's a whole script of stuff put on that person before they enter the planet. There's just like, oh, they're gonna do this set of things, and all these other things that they could have done are immediately negated because they're a girl now. And so as that person grows up, there's expectations and sort of a script that's given to them, and this like idea that needs to be fulfilled in order for that contract to work. But if instead we open up our idea that gender, again, is just a contract, so it can be fluid, and it can just be what we need it to be, which is a parent only wants to be close to their child, a child only wants to be close to their parent. And so they can be close if they let each other be who they are. And if the contract becomes, instead of, you have to be this person in order for you to fit this role for me, and instead, you are my child, I want to be close to you, that's what the contract is. You can be whoever you want, and I will be sort of the complement to that, and vice versa. Anyways, the film is just, oh my God, the film is so good. And it's like queering the form and its structure. I mean, like, you don't even meet the dad character until Act 2. I love that. Everybody's like, oh, you have to meet all the characters by Act 1. It's like, no, you don't. Like, what? No. And just there are so many conventions that the film breaks, and it goes into these like trance moments that feel really embodied and present, like with the dance, the slow-mo dancing. And I'm like, that's trans. Like, that's a trans gaze on something, because it's slowing down the world and just zooming in on this like visual of masculinity pumping. And like, let's just look at that, because it's all these like shirtless firefighters dancing in slow motion. And because the scene goes on for a long time, you start to meditate on like what you're looking at, and it no longer becomes just a party of people dancing. It becomes like an meditation on masculinity and all of that, which just feels very trans to me. To dissect that kind of stuff in that way.
Yeah, I think so. Kind of your premise to somewhat with the you said you're working on this essay.
Yes. Yeah, and Crimes of the Future is another example
also
of a trans film. And it's funny, both directed by like cis white people.
Yeah.
You know, Julia, the director of Titane, is queer, but David Cronenberg obviously is not. And I think that's a really trans movie.
It would be interesting, maybe in the essay that you're doing, to look at, like, I mean, Crimes of the Future I can certainly see, but I think maybe many of his films have an aspect to that.
And his son's film Infinity Pool also I think is like a really trans movie, even though it's like centering this like white cis Adonis of a man, Alexander Skarsgård, but it's like the most trans thing I've ever seen.
It's
TBH.
Well, it's interesting because I guess to point your premise is sort of pointing out that what makes a film trans, whoever made it, is sort of this look at this revelation of the constructed nature of gender, but also just kind of looking at what we have constructed as gender.
Exactly. Yes, that's a great way to put it. Much more concise.
No, but you put it very well the way you did it. But and that which brings me to another film that I saw on that same list, Force Majeure,
Oh my God.
which
You guys, have you seen Force Majeure? Oh, such a good movie.
good,
Ostland.
funny, but also very uncomfortable.
Yes.
But what struck me about the film is it was very much about the construction of masculinity. Like so if you haven't seen the film, a lot of the film kind of centers on the fact that this family is on a ski trip, and the husband there's an avalanche, and the husband, instead of the expectation that it would be put on a man of like throwing himself in front of it to save his family, runs away.
And like leaves his kid and wife like at the table. He like bolts, and the mom is like trying to cover the kids. And he grabs his phone. He grabs his phone and runs. And what's funny is that the avalanche, because avalanches happen and the snow is like powdery, it looks like it's about to hit you, even if it's happening in the distance and it's just the powder that's emerging. So it was actually just the powder that was blowing over the restaurant. And so in a few minutes, like the dust settles and like everyone's like, whoa, that was crazy. Like, whew. And the wife is like, you guys are okay? Where's our husband? And then a few minutes later, he like walks back in his ski boots, sort of like acting like nothing happened. It's still like, that happens in the first like 5 minutes of the movie. It's so good.
And it really feeds into the rest of it, because it's that expectation of masculinity that he must do that. And I mean, I guess, would you consider that also
A trans movie?
Yeah.
Yes. I think that like it doesn't quite fit my argument all the way, because there is a dual approach of like encountering the body and then the stories around gender that together create like a trans gaze in a film. So Force Majeure is like mostly to do with like the stories of gender and the stories of like the role we're meant to play. It sort of, it invokes an exploration of the body because it is this avalanche, and because the father starts to go into this like crazy panic attack space where he's like wailing and just, so that it almost gets there, but it doesn't totally get there. I think Ostland is more of like a cerebral filmmaker, whereas David Cronenberg and Julia Ducournau are more sort of concerned with the body, and the concepts sort of come from the body versus the other way around.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Makes
Yeah.
sense. I'll throw it out to the audience one more time. Any last questions?
No pressure.
No pressure at all. You guys don't have to.
I have a question. Hi.
Thank you for
First of all, let's talk about the heart. There's a lot of heart in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of love in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And in a time where we are right now, we could definitely have more of that. My question is, here we are as an audience wanting to be here, wanting to see this. Where is this film going outside of New York City or California? Where is it going in this country? Because I think it's a movie that needs to be seen.
Yeah.
Because it is a love story
Yeah.
in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for saying that. Yes. So we are a tiny, tiny movie. And so we had our theatrical run. We were in 24 cities across the country, which was amazing. But the problem of that is we would be in a city, let's say like Denver, for a week, but there was no marketing dollars to tell people to go. So we did that and had a certain level of impact. But what's more amazing is that we're going to be on Netflix starting on November 17th. Yeah. That's so nice. So it'll be available in North America, in Canada, and the US on Netflix, which is awesome. And then it's also available to purchase on like Amazon and iTunes and places like that for people who don't have a Netflix subscription. But I'm hoping that it actually gets international streaming, because I was just invited to Taiwan, which is crazy, to go and screen this film and talk to people. Like, the film has had a really beautiful reception in countries and cultures all over the world that are really different from each other and different from the US. And so it's been really cool to be able to travel with the film and talk to high school students in Mexico or in Italy or in different places And so I really hope that the streaming service is able to be expanded. That's my hope. And if we do well on Netflix in North America, then they might expand us. So tell your friends to watch it at home and maybe just stream it when they're not even at home, just on loop. Whatever. Whatever you guys want.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But it's true, like, this is a very accessible movie in that it gives heart to all of the people that are around Feña. Like, no one is villainized, you know? And the father character who maybe doesn't understand his son very well, but loves him and is trying to connect with him, even if he's not saying the right thing. And I think so many people in this country, at least, only speaking for us, like, actually would totally love and be down to have a trans relative or a trans friend. They just either don't know someone or feel like they don't know how to relate to that person, because our political landscape has taught us that trans people or anyone who's different is somehow meant to be like suspicious, or you're scared of them, or they don't trust you, so you shouldn't trust them, or whatever. Whereas in reality, it's like Feña's just a regular person who's imperfect and doing his best, and his father loves him and is able to show up in his imperfect way, and that's enough. Like, it's actually okay. Yeah, and his sister. Like, she's, I mean, so many young people are just like down with whatever these days. And so I love her portrayal of like, yeah, you're trans, whatever. Like, you're just, I don't care. Like, I have a friend who's trans. And meanwhile, Feña's like coming out in this like intense way. Do you know what being trans is? But yeah, so anyways, thank you for saying that.
I think I saw one more hand. No? Okay. Well, we'll just wrap up then with, well, you just said where people are going to be able to see Mutt next, but I know you have other projects that you're working on, and that Emily was mentioning. How can people see, like, I know you have installation projects, I think, is that right?
Yeah.
Where can people see stuff?
So that's tough because that's like a thing you have to be in person for. I'm working right now on the sculpture project that hopefully will have like a full show in LA next year. But if you, this is so cringe to say.
We'll carpool over there.
Yeah, hell yeah. This is really cringe to say, but if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see the updates. But on that, and then I'm in a film called In the Summers. That's another indie film, really beautiful, that will hopefully come out next year. So you can look out for that. And that's another Latina queer filmmaker, really amazing. And for those in the audience who know the rapper and music artist Residente, Calle 13 is this like Puerto Rican band. And Residente is like the lead singer in it. He plays my dad in the movie, which is pretty iconic. It's his first acting role, so definitely look out for that. Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's give another round of applause for Leo and Mutt.